Every empire that has ever risen in this galaxy believed it would last forever. The Draven Dominion was no different. For 6,000 years, they had collected tribute from over 900 species across 4 galactic arms. They had crushed rebellions before breakfast and erased entire civilizations before dinner. Their warships darkened the skies of 1,000 worlds. Their tax collectors walked through foreign streets like gods among insects. No species had ever refused them twice. No species had ever needed to, because the first refusal always ended the same way, with fire, with silence, and with a new dead world added to the long list of examples. So when their sensors picked up a small blue planet on the edge of a forgotten spiral arm, broadcasting strange signals into the void, they did what they always did. They sent the demand. And they expected what always came next: surrender. But the universe has a strange sense of humor, because on that small blue planet lived a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself, surviving ice ages, plagues, famines, and wars that should have wiped them out 10 times over. A species that looked at impossible odds the way most creatures looked at an open door. They were called humans. And they were about to do something no species had ever done before. The Draven scout vessel emerged from Fold space at the edge of the Sol system on a Tuesday afternoon, Earth time. It was a small ship by Draven standards, barely 300 meters long, shaped like a curved blade made of dark metal. Its hull absorbed light rather than reflecting it, giving it the appearance of a wound cut into the fabric of space itself. Commander Vorath stood at the observation deck, his forearms folded behind his back, his deep violet eyes scanning the data feeds that floated in the air before him. He was tall even for a Draven, nearly 3 meters, with skin the color of burned copper and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had served the Dominion for 200 standard years. He had delivered the demand to 47 species. 45 had surrendered immediately. 2 had tried to resist. Those 2 no longer existed. He looked at the blue planet growing larger in the viewport and felt nothing. It was just another world. Another collection of primitives who had barely figured out how to leave their own gravity well. His senses told him they had achieved basic space travel, had placed a few small stations in orbit around their world, and had sent unmanned probes to nearby planets. Primitive. Laughably primitive. Their largest warships were little more than metal boxes with chemical propulsion systems. Their weapons were based on kinetic projectiles and controlled nuclear reactions. A single Draven fighter could destroy their entire orbital fleet in less than 10 minutes. Vorath turned to his communications officer, a younger Draven named Sithin, who sat hunched over a curved console, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. "Have you decoded their primary communication frequencies?" Vorath asked. His voice was deep and carried the weight of absolute authority. Sithin nodded.
"Yes, Commander."
"They use a surprisingly wide range of electromagnetic frequencies, radio waves, microwave transmissions, even some rudimentary laser communications between their orbital platforms and ground stations. Their languages are numerous. Our translation matrices have identified over 7,000 distinct languages and dialects, though approximately a dozen appear to be dominant in their global communications." Vorath raised one eyebrow. 7,000 languages on a single world. That was unusual. Most species unified their communication systems long before they achieved space travel. The fact that these creatures still maintain thousands of different ways to speak to each other suggested either remarkable cultural diversity or remarkable stubbornness, possibly both. It did not matter. They would all learn to speak the language of tribute soon enough. "Prepare the standard demand transmission," Vorath ordered. "Broadcast it on all their major frequencies simultaneously. Use their dominant languages. Make sure every population center on that planet hears it." Sithin hesitated for just a moment. "Commander, standard protocol suggests we first conduct a full planetary assessment before issuing the demand. We have not yet catalogued their resources, military capabilities, or governing structures." Vorath waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. "Look at them, Sithin. They are burning fossil fuels for energy. They are fighting each other with gunpowder weapons. Their most advanced spacecraft moves at a fraction of light speed. What assessment do we need? They are primitives. Send the demand." Sithin lowered his head in obedience and began preparing the transmission. Within minutes, the message was ready. It was the same message the Draven had sent to 900 species before. It was simple, direct, and left no room for misunderstanding. The transmission hit Earth like a thunderbolt. Every television screen, every radio, every computer, every phone on the planet suddenly displayed the same message at the same time, in every major language, in every country, in every city and town and village. People stopped in the streets. Cars pulled over on highways. Factory workers stood frozen at their stations. Children in classrooms stared at screens that had gone dark before filling with alien text. The message read, "Inhabitants of the third planet in the star system you designate as Sol, you are hereby informed that your world and all its resources now fall under the jurisdiction of the Draven Dominion. As a newly catalogued species, you are required to pay tribute as follows. 20% of all mineral resources extracted from your world and any celestial bodies within your system. 15% of all agricultural output. 10% of your annual population growth to be delivered as a labor force for Dominion projects. 5% of all technological innovations and intellectual property. Additionally, you will dismantle all military forces and weapons systems within one standard rotation of your world around its star. A Draven administrative delegation will arrive in 30 of your planetary rotations to formalize the arrangement and begin collection. Resistance is not advised. The Draven Dominion has governed this galaxy for 6,000 years. Over 900 species currently pay tribute. Those that refused no longer exist. You have 30 rotations to comply. There will be no further warnings. For exactly 17 minutes, the entire planet was silent. Every human being on Earth read or heard those words, and for 17 minutes, nobody said anything. It was the longest silence in human history. 7 billion people, all holding their breath at the same time. Then, the silence broke. And when it broke loudly. The United Nations convened an emergency session within 2 hours. Every world leader who could be reached was patched into the meeting, either in person or via secure communication links. The Secretary General, a calm and measured woman named Daisy Okonkwo, stood at the podium and looked out at a room full of terrified faces. Ambassadors who had spent their careers arguing over trade agreements and border disputes were now staring at each other with the wide eyes of people who had just realized that every argument they had ever had was suddenly completely irrelevant. "We have confirmed that the transmission is genuine," Okonkwo said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was saying. "It originates from a vessel currently positioned approximately 400,000 kilometers from Earth, roughly at the same distance as our moon. Our observatories have confirmed the presence of this vessel. It is unlike anything we have ever seen. The message is real, and we have 30 days to respond." The room erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other. Some demanded immediate surrender. Some demanded military action. Some demanded prayer. The Russian delegate slammed his fist on the table and declared that Russia would never bow to alien masters. The Chinese delegate argued for a diplomatic approach. The American delegate was on his phone, presumably talking to the Pentagon. The British delegate was trying to maintain order while simultaneously looking like he might faint. Meanwhile, outside the halls of power, the world reacted in its own way. There were riots in some cities. There were prayer vigils in others. Stock markets crashed within minutes and did not recover. People emptied grocery stores and hardware stores. Families gathered together and held each other. Some people laughed because they did not know what else to do. Some people cried. Some people went to work the next day as if nothing had happened, because routine was the only thing that made sense anymore. But beneath the panic, something else was happening. Something quieter. Something that the Draven, with all their advanced senses and 6,000 years of experience, had not anticipated and could not have understood even if they had detected it. Humans were getting angry, not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly. This was something different. This was the cold, slow, deep anger that settles into the bones of a species that has survived everything the universe has thrown at it. The anger of people who had clawed their way out of caves and ice ages. The anger of people who had looked at oceans and said, "I wonder what is on the other side." The anger of people who had split the atom and walked on their own moon. The anger of a species that had never, not once in its entire bloody, beautiful, stubborn history, accepted that anything was impossible. In a small lab at MIT, a physicist named Dr. James Whitfield stared at the readings from the alien vessel and began running calculations that no one had ever thought to run before. The energy signatures from the ship suggested a form of space manipulation that was theoretically possible, but had always been dismissed as impractical. Within hours, he had assembled a team of 12 of the brightest minds in theoretical physics and locked them in a conference room with enough coffee to kill a lesser species. In a military bunker beneath the mountains of Colorado, General Sarah Chen sat at a table surrounded by the Joint Chiefs and studied the alien vessel with the cold, analytical eye of a woman who had spent her entire career preparing for threats. She did not waste time on panic. She did not waste time on despair. She looked at the data and asked the only question that mattered: what are their weaknesses? In a garage in Seoul, a 23-year-old hacker named Park Min-jun cracked his knuckles and began probing the alien transmission signal, looking for patterns, looking for backdoors, looking for anything that might give him a way into their systems. He had once broken into the most secure military network on Earth on a dare. An alien communication system was just a bigger dare. In a shipyard in Mumbai, engineers who had been building cargo vessels looked at each other and without a word began pulling up designs for something very different. In factories in Germany, production lines that had been making cars quietly shifted to making something else. In universities across the world, professors who had spent their lives studying theoretical concepts suddenly found that their governments were very, very interested in turning those theories into reality. None of this was coordinated. There was no grand plan. No single leader had issued an order. It was simply what humans did when they were backed into a corner. They adapted. They innovated. They fought, not because someone told them to, but because it was written into their very nature, into every cell of their bodies, into every neuron of their brains. Survival was not just an instinct for humans. It was an art form. On the Draven scout vessel, Commander Vorath reviewed the planet's initial response to the demand and nodded with satisfaction. He had seen the panic. He had seen the chaos in their communication networks. He had seen the economic collapse. All standard reactions. All predictable. In his experience, the next phase would be acceptance, followed by compliance. It was always the same. He retired to his quarters and did not bother to monitor the planet further. There was no need. He had done this 47 times before. He knew exactly how it would go. This was the first of many mistakes Commander Vorath would make regarding the species known as humans. 3 days after the transmission, the initial panic had not subsided, but it had transformed. The United Nations had formed what they called the Global Defense Council, a body with representatives from every nation on Earth given unprecedented authority to coordinate humanity's response. For the first time in human history, every nation agreed on something. The arguments were not about whether to resist. The arguments were about how. Secretary General Okonkwo addressed the world in a broadcast that reached every screen on the planet. She stood straight and spoke clearly. We have received a demand from an alien power that claims dominion over our world. They have given us 30 days to surrender our resources, our people, and our freedom. They have told us that resistance is not advised. They have told us that species which refuse no longer exist. She paused and looked directly into the camera. I have consulted with the leaders of every nation on this earth, and I want to be very clear about our answer. We are humanity. We have survived ice ages that covered our world in glaciers. We have survived plagues that killed half our population. We have survived wars that nearly destroyed us. We have split the atom. We have walked on our moon. We have looked into the deepest secrets of the universe and refused to look away. We do not pay tribute. We do not surrender our children as labor. We do not bow, not to each other, not to nature, and certainly not to anyone who comes to our home uninvited and demands that we kneel. She paused again, and the silence was different from the silence that had followed the alien message. This silence was not shock. It was agreement. To the Draven Dominion. Whoever and whatever you are, here is our answer. Come and take it if you can. The speech was broadcast in every language on Earth, and for the second time in a week, the entire planet was silent. But this time, the silence ended not with fear, but with something else entirely. It ended with a roar. In every city, in every country, in every language, humans raised their voices, not in panic, not in prayer, in defiance. It was the sound of 7 billion people choosing to fight rather than kneel. It echoed through streets and homes and workplaces, and it carried a message that the Draven had never heard from any species in 6,000 years. No! On his ship, Commander Vorath heard the response. He listened to it carefully. He processed the words. And for the first time in his long career, he felt something he did not immediately recognize. It took him several moments to identify the emotion. It was confusion. No species had ever said no, not like this. Not with such unified, absolute. He replayed the message. He analyzed the tone. He studied the data from the planet's surface, the massive gatherings, the shifts in industrial output, the sudden surge in military communications. He opened a channel to the Dominion High Command, located in a star system 30,000 light-years away. His message was brief and, for the first time in his career, uncertain. I command. This is Commander Vorath. Scout Vessel 7. The species on the third planet of the Sol system has refused the demand. They appear to be preparing for resistance. I am requesting guidance on how to proceed. I have also included detailed sensor data on their planet and technology. I want to note for the record that while their technology is primitive, their response to the demand is unlike anything in our historical database. I recommend caution. He sent the message and waited. The response would take time, even with fold space communication relays. In the meantime, he increased his sensor coverage of the planet and began paying closer attention to what the humans were doing. What he saw over the next several days troubled him in ways he could not fully explain. The humans were not just preparing for war. They were transforming. Their entire global infrastructure was shifting, retooling, reorganizing at a speed that should not have been possible for a species at their technological level. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were now producing weapons and military hardware. Research institutions that had been studying abstract theories were now pursuing applied military technology with a focus and intensity that was almost frightening. Their governments, which his initial scans had shown to be fractured and often hostile to each other, had unified overnight into a single coordinated entity. But what troubled him most was something his senses could detect, but his experience could not explain. The humans were not afraid. The initial panic had vanished. In its place was something his translation matrices could only describe as determined fury. Their communications were not filled with pleas or despair. They were filled with plans, designs, strategies, and a constant, relentless drumbeat of the same message repeated in 7,000 languages. We will not kneel. Commander Vorath sat in the dark of his observation deck and watched the blue planet spin slowly in the void. He had a strange, uncomfortable feeling that he had made a terrible mistake, not in delivering the demand. That was his duty. But in assuming that this species was like all the others, he was beginning to suspect that humans were something that Draven Dominion had never encountered before. Something new. Something dangerous. 22 days remained before the Draven administrative delegation was scheduled to arrive, and the planet Earth looked nothing like it had when the demand was first delivered. From orbit, Commander Vorath could see the changes with his own eyes. New structures were rising in deserts and on mountainsides. Massive construction projects had appeared seemingly overnight in locations that his initial scans had shown as empty wilderness. The oceans, which had previously been dotted with civilian shipping traffic, were now crisscrossed with military vessels moving in coordinated patterns that suggested large-scale naval exercises, and the electromagnetic spectrum around the planet had become so dense with encrypted military communications that his senses could barely process it all. But it was the things he could not see that worried him most. James Whitfield had not slept in 6 days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands trembled slightly from the amount of caffeine in his system, but his mind had never been clearer. He stood in front of a whiteboard that covered an entire wall of the underground laboratory that the United States government had provided for his team, and the equations written across it in his small, precise handwriting represented something that should not have existed, something that 3 weeks ago would have been dismissed as science fiction. It works, he said quietly to the room full of exhausted scientists behind him. The math works. Priya Sharma, a quantum physicist from the Indian Institute of Technology who had been flown to the facility on a military transport 48 hours after the demand, leaned forward in her chair. James, are you saying what I think you are saying? Whitfield turned to face the group. There were 12 of them, drawn from universities and research institutions across the world. The brightest minds in physics, engineering, and materials science. They had been given unlimited resources and a single directive from the Global Defense Council. Find a way to level the playing field. The Draven ship uses a form of space-folding technology for propulsion, Whitfield explained, pointing to a section of the whiteboard covered in tensor equations. When they transmitted the demand, The signal carried embedded information about their drive system. It was unintentional, a byproduct of the way their communication array interacts with their fold space engines. Park Min-jun's team in Seoul identified these embedded signatures and forwarded them to us. He paused and took a breath. Based on these signatures, we have been able to reverse engineer the fundamental principles of their fold space technology. And I believe we can build something similar, not identical. Our version will be cruder, less efficient, and probably dangerous. But it will work. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a theoretical physicist from Tokyo who had written his doctoral thesis on exotic matter, stood up. How long to build a prototype? If we had normal timelines, 5 years, minimum, maybe 10. Whitfield's jaw tightened. We have 20, so we are going to do it in 22 days. Nobody laughed. Nobody said it was impossible. They simply nodded and went back to work. Because that was what humans did. They looked at impossible deadlines and impossible problems, and they found ways to make them possible. Not through magic. Through stubbornness, ingenuity, and an absolute refusal to accept limitations that the universe tried to impose on them. Across the world, similar scenes were playing out in hundreds of facilities. In a converted automobile factory in Detroit, engineers were assembling the first prototypes of a weapons system based on directed energy principles that had been theoretical just weeks before. The alien vessel's energy signatures had given human physicists critical data points that filled in gaps in their understanding of plasma containment and directed energy projection. The weapons were ugly and oversized and ran so hot that they needed constant liquid cooling. But in tests against reinforced steel targets, they cut through 3 meters of solid metal in under a second. In an underground facility beneath the Swiss Alps, a team of materials scientists had synthesized a new alloy based on spectral analysis of the Draven ship's hull. They could not replicate the exact material, but they had created something that was far stronger than anything humans had produced before. It was being shipped to construction sites around the world within hours of its first successful production run. In the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean, submarines from 6 different navies were working together for the first time in history, installing a network of sensor arrays designed to detect fold space signatures. If the Draven sent more ships, humanity would know about it the moment they entered the solar system. And in a nondescript office building in Geneva, the Global Defense Council was meeting around the clock, coordinating what had become the largest and most ambitious project in human history. Secretary General Okonkwo sat at the head of the table, and the exhaustion on her face was matched only by the determination in her eyes. Report from the Science Division, she said, gesturing to a tall, thin man in a rumpled suit who stood near a display screen. Dr. Marcus Webb, appointed as the Chief Science Coordinator for the Council, cleared his throat. We have made more progress in 3 weeks than the global scientific community has made in the previous decade. The alien transmission inadvertently gave us a roadmap. Their technology is advanced, but it is based on the same physical laws we already understand. They just have a deeper understanding of those laws and better engineering. We are closing the gap faster than anyone thought possible. How fast? Asked General Chen, who attended every council meeting via secure video link from her bunker in Colorado. Fast enough to matter, General. We will not match their technology in 30 days. That is not realistic. But we can develop countermeasures. We can develop weapons that will make them bleed. And, most importantly, we have identified what we believe are vulnerabilities in their fold space drive system. Explain. Their fold space drives create a localized distortion in space-time when they activate. During the transition period, approximately 3 to 5 seconds based on our analysis, the ship is vulnerable. Its shields, which operate on a spatial frequency principle, cannot function during fold space transition. If we can predict when and where a Draven ship is going to emerge from fold space, we can hit it during that window. 3 to 5 seconds, General Chen repeated. That is a very small window. Yes, ma'am. Which is why we are building very fast weapons. Meanwhile, Park Min-jun had not left his garage in Seoul for 18 days. He had been joined by a rotating team of the world's best hackers, cryptographers, and computer scientists. They communicated with similar teams in Israel, the United Kingdom, Japan, and the United States through encrypted channels. Their mission was different from the scientists building weapons and the engineers building ships. Their mission was to get inside the aliens' information systems. Their encryption is not encryption as we understand it, Minjun explained to a group of bleary-eyed colleagues gathered around a bank of monitors. It is based on quantum state manipulation. Each packet of data is encoded in a specific quantum state that can only be decoded with the matching quantum key. In theory, it is unbreakable. In theory, repeated a young woman named Elena Volkov, a Russian cryptographer who had been smuggled out of Moscow on a military flight 3 days after the demand. Minjun smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in weeks. In theory. But theory assumes perfect implementation, and their implementation is not perfect. I found something in the embedded data from their transmission. A pattern. It is very small, very subtle, but it is there. Their quantum encryption resets on a predictable cycle. Every 47 seconds, there is a gap of approximately 2 nanoseconds where the quantum state is in transition. During that gap, the encryption is vulnerable. Eleanor stared at him. You want to break into an alien computer system through a 2 nanosecond window that opens every 47 seconds? Yes. That is insane. That is why they will not expect it. Elena considered this for a moment and then nodded. Tell me what you need. On day 25, 5 days before the delegation was scheduled to arrive, something happened that Commander Vorath had not anticipated. He received a response from Draven High Command. The message was brief and carried the authority of the Supreme Arbiter, the highest-ranking official in the entire Dominion. Commander Vorath, your report has been received. The refusal of the Sol System species is noted. This is not unprecedented, but is extremely rare. The Supreme Arbiter has authorized the dispatch of a compliance fleet to accompany the administrative delegation. The fleet will consist of 12 warships of the Ravager class, commanded by Fleet Commander Thyrax. You are ordered to maintain observation of the planet and report any significant changes. Do not engage the species. Wait for the fleet. The compliance fleet will arrive in approximately 30 standard rotations from the date of this message. The administrative delegation will proceed on schedule. If the species is not complied by the time the fleet arrives, standard pacification protocols will be enacted. Glory to the Dominion. Vorath read the message 3 times. 12 Ravager-class warships. That was enough firepower to sterilize the surface of a planet twice over. The Supreme Arbiter was not taking any chances. He wanted to make an example of these humans. Vorath should have felt reassured. The fleet would arrive and the humans would be given one final chance to comply. If they refused, they would be destroyed. Simple. Clean. The same story that had played out dozens of times before. But Vorath did not feel reassured. Because over the past 25 days, he had been watching the humans very carefully, and what he had seen defied everything he knew about primitive species. Their technological advancement was accelerating at a rate that his models could not explain. In less than a month, they had gone from chemical rockets to testing prototype engines that operated on principles dangerously close to fold space manipulation. Their industrial output had increased by over 300%. Their military forces, which had been fragmented and often opposed to each other, were now operating as a single unified force with a coordination and efficiency that rivaled species that had been spacefaring for centuries. And then there was the thing that disturbed him most of all. They had started building ships, not the small, clumsy vessels they had been using before the demand. These were something entirely different. His sensors detected construction activity in 17 different locations across the planet, all heavily shielded against electromagnetic detection. He could not get clear readings on what was being built inside those facilities, but the energy signatures were enormous. Whatever the humans were building, it was big, it was powerful, and it was being built at a speed that should have been physically impossible. Vorath composed a follow-up report to High Command, flagging the anomalous technological acceleration and recommending that the compliance fleet be increased in size. He received a curt response telling him to stop worrying and to follow his orders. He followed his orders. But he did not stop worrying. On day 28, 2 days before the administrative delegation was due to arrive, General Chen stood in a massive underground hangar carved into the rock beneath the Nevada desert and looked up at something that made her heart beat faster. It was a ship. It was not pretty. It was angular and brutal looking, welded together from the new alloy that the Swiss team had developed, bristling with the directed energy weapons that the Detroit engineers had perfected, and powered by a prototype fold space drive that Dr. Whitfield's team had somehow built in 26 days. It was 200 meters long, roughly the size of the alien scout vessel, and it looked like it had been designed by people who cared more about killing things than about aerodynamics. It was the most beautiful thing General Chen had ever seen. "Does it work?" she asked the chief engineer, a heavy-set woman named Rodriguez who had grease on her face and pride in her eyes. "It works, General. We tested the drive system yesterday. Short hop, about 100,000 kilometers. There were some problems. The inertial dampeners are not as effective as we would like, and 2 of the crew members experienced temporary blindness from the spatial distortion. But the ship held together and the weapon systems are fully operational." "How many do we have?" Rodriguez hesitated. "This is the only one that is fully complete. But we have 6 more in various stages of construction across the world. 3 of them will be combat ready within 48 hours. The other 3 will need another week." General Chen nodded. 4 ships against whatever the Draven was sending. She had fought wars with worse odds. What about the ground-based defenses? "We have directed energy platforms on every continent. The orbital sensor network is online. And the electromagnetic warfare systems that Park Minjan's team developed are ready for deployment." "What about the thing?" Chen asked, lowering her voice slightly. Rodriguez's expression became very serious. "The thing is ready, General. God help us all, but it is ready." Chen looked at the ship one more time and then turned to leave. There was too much to do and too little time to do it. As she walked through the corridor toward the elevator that would take her back to the surface, she passed a wall where someone had painted a message in large, rough letters. It read, "They want tribute. Give them hell." On the morning of Day 30, the Draven administrative delegation dropped out of fold space exactly where Commander Vorath's vessel was positioned. It consisted of 3 vessels, each one smaller and less armed than Vorath's scout ship. They were diplomatic vessels, designed to carry administrators, accountants, and the bureaucratic machinery of tribute collection. They were not designed for combat. They did not need to be. In the entire history of the Dominion, no species had ever attacked a diplomatic delegation. Lead Administrator Gorvex, a thin, precise Draven with pale skin and 4 arms that moved with the mechanical efficiency of a calculating machine, stepped onto the bridge of his vessel and surveyed the blue planet before him. He had collected tribute from over 60 species. To him, it was a routine procedure. Arrive, establish the terms, set up the collection infrastructure, and move on to the next world. "Commander Vorath," he said through the communications link, "has the species shown any indication of compliance?" "No," Vorath replied. "They have refused the demand and appear to be preparing for military resistance." Gorvax made a sound that was the Draven equivalent of a dismissive sigh. "They always resist at first. It is posturing. Once they see our vessels in their sky, they will comply. They always do. Open a channel to their governing body." Vorath opened the channel. Gorvax's message was broadcast to Earth on the same frequencies that the original demand had used. "Inhabitants of the 3rd planet. This is lead Administrator Gorvex of the Draven Dominion. Your 30 rotations have expired. I am here to formalize the tribute arrangement. Transmit the location of your primary governing facility so that my delegation may land and begin the administrative process. Cooperation will be noted favorably." The response came within 90 seconds. It was a single voice, transmitted from the United Nations building in New York. It belonged to Secretary General Okonkwo. "Lead Administrator Gorvex. This is Secretary General Adazi Okonkwo, speaking on behalf of all the people of Earth. We have received your message. We understand your terms. And we wish to inform you, formally and for the record, that our answer has not changed. We will not pay tribute. We will not surrender our people. We will not dismantle our defenses. If you wish to discuss alternative arrangements based on mutual respect and equality, we are willing to talk. If you are here only to collect what you believe you are owed, then I suggest you turn your ships around and leave our system. Because we are not what you think we are." Gorvex listened to the response and turned to Vorath with an expression of mild irritation. "Stubborn, but ultimately irrelevant. The compliance fleet will correct their misconceptions when it arrives. In the meantime, I will proceed with the standard administrative approach. We will land our delegation at their primary governing facility and begin the process. Once they see that we are serious, they will comply." "Administrator," Vorath said carefully, "these humans are not like other species. They have made significant technological advances since the demand was issued. Their military posture is aggressive and coordinated. I believe that landing a diplomatic vessel on their world could be extremely dangerous. Gorvex stared at Vorath with the expression of a bureaucrat who had just been told something absurd by a subordinate. Commander, I have administered tribute collection on 61 worlds. I have dealt with resistant species before. They bluster. They threaten. And when they see the reality of our presence, they fold. These primitives are no different. I will proceed with the landing. Administrator, I strongly recommend. Your recommendation is noted and overruled, Commander. Prepare a landing trajectory for the coordinates of their primary governing facility. We will land in 1 hour. Vorath closed the communication channel and sat in silence for a long moment. And he did something he had never done in 200 years of service. He began quietly preparing his ship for an emergency fold space jump. Not because he was a coward, but because he had spent 30 days watching the humans, and he had developed a deep, instinctive certainty that lead Administrator Gorvex was about to make a terrible mistake. 1 hour later, the 3 Draven diplomatic vessels entered Earth's atmosphere, descending in a tight formation toward the city of New York. They broke through the clouds and the city spread out below them, a vast grid of steel and glass and concrete, teeming with millions of lives. The vessels slowed and began their landing approach toward the United Nations complex. They never made it. At exactly the moment the vessels crossed into the airspace above the city, every electronic system on all 3 ships simultaneously shut down. Navigation, propulsion, weapons, shields, life support, communications. Everything went dead at once. The 3 vessels, suddenly nothing more than 3 very heavy pieces of metal, dropped from the sky like stones. Emergency backup systems kicked in after 2 seconds, which was just enough time for the pilots to regain partial control and convert a catastrophic crash into a merely devastating one. The 3 vessels slammed into the East River with enough force to create a wave that flooded the lower levels of buildings along the waterfront. The impact was heard across the entire city. Inside the lead vessel, Gorvex pulled himself out of the wreckage of his command chair, bleeding from a gash on his head, and stared at his dead control panels with an expression of utter disbelief. What happened? He demanded. His chief technician, crawling out from under a collapsed console, looked up with terror in his eyes. Some kind of electromagnetic weapon, Administrator. Targeted, precisely calibrated to our systems. It disabled everything. Everything. I have never seen anything like it. That is impossible, Gorvex said. Their technology is primitive. They cannot possibly have... He was interrupted by the sound of boots. Many boots. Coming from outside the vessel. Through the cracked viewport of the bridge, he could see them. Humans. Hundreds of them. Soldiers in dark uniforms, carrying weapons that did not look like anything his briefing files had described. They were surrounding all 3 vessels in a coordinated military formation that was precise, efficient, and absolutely without hesitation. A voice crackled through the emergency speakers of the vessel. It was speaking in the Draven language, which should have been impossible since no human had ever heard the Draven language before 30 days ago. Draven vessels. You have entered Earth's sovereign airspace without permission. Your ships have been disabled. Your weapons are non-functional. You are surrounded by armed forces. You will power down any remaining systems and exit your vessels with all appendages visible. You will be treated according to the principles of our Geneva Conventions as long as you cooperate. If you do not cooperate, we will not be gentle. You have 60 seconds. Gorvex stood in the ruins of his bridge and felt something that Draven administrators were never supposed to feel. Something that $60 won successful tribute collections had never prepared him for. 400,000 kilometers above, Commander Vorath watched the sensor data from the landing and felt his blood turn cold. The humans had not just shot down the diplomatic vessels, they had disabled them with a targeted electromagnetic weapon that had been precisely calibrated to Draven technology. That meant they had analyzed Draven systems, identified their vulnerabilities, and built a countermeasure, all in 30 days. He immediately opened a priority channel to the compliance fleet, which was still en route. Fleet Commander Thyrax, this is Commander Vorath. The administrative delegation has been captured by the humans. I repeat, all 3 diplomatic vessels have been disabled and their crews taken prisoner. The humans possess electromagnetic weapons specifically designed to counter Draven technology. I am upgrading my threat assessment of this species from minimal to extreme. I strongly recommend the compliance fleet approach with maximum caution. These are not primitives. I do not know what they are, but they are not primitives. He sent the message, and then turned back to watch the blue planet. The humans had taken the first move in a game that no species had ever dared to play with the Draven Dominion. They had captured a Draven delegation. They had shown that they could defeat Draven technology. And they had done it all in 30 days. Vorath was a soldier. He had seen war. He had seen the Dominion crush rebellion after rebellion with overwhelming force. He knew that the Compliance fleet of 12 Ravager-class warships carried enough firepower to reduce the planet below to molten glass. But for the first time in his 200 years of life, Commander Vorath was not certain that firepower would be enough. Because the humans were not afraid. And in Vorath's experience, the most dangerous enemy in the universe was one that was not afraid to die. The Compliance fleet dropped out of fold space on the edge of the Sol system like a fist closing around a throat. 12 Ravager-class warships, each one over a kilometer long, their hulls dark and scarred from centuries of service, their weapons arrays glowing with barely contained energy. Fleet Commander Thyrax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, and stared at the tiny blue planet on his display screen, with the quiet contempt of a predator studying prey that had foolishly decided to bare its teeth. Thyrax was not like Vorath. Where Vorath was cautious and analytical, Thyrax was a hammer. He had commanded compliance fleets for over 300 years. He had pacified 11 species that had refused the demand. Not one of those species had survived the experience. He did not believe in caution. He believed in overwhelming force applied swiftly and without mercy. It was efficient. It was effective. And it sent a message to every other species in the galaxy. The Dominion does not negotiate with insects. He had received Vorath's warnings and had dismissed them with the casual indifference of a predator that had never encountered anything capable of threatening it. Electromagnetic weapons that could disable Draven ships, rapid technological advancement, unified military response. Thyrax had heard similar reports before from nervous scout commanders who had let the bluster of primitive species get under their skin. It never amounted to anything. Primitives were primitives. They could sharpen their sticks all they wanted. Against a compliance fleet, sticks were sticks. Open a channel to the planet, Thyrax ordered, settling into his command chair with the practiced ease of a being who had spent centuries in that position. The communications officer complied. Thyrax's voice echoed across every frequency on Earth, deep and resonant and utterly devoid of warmth. Species designated human. This is Fleet Commander Thyrax of the Draven Dominion Compliance Fleet. You have refused the demand. You have captured a Draven administrative delegation. You have committed acts of aggression against the Dominion. These actions carry consequences. You now have one choice remaining. Release the captured delegation immediately, dismantle all military assets, and submit to the original tribute terms. If you do this within one rotation of your world, we will limit our response to standard pacification. If you do not, your world will be cleansed. Every city, every settlement, every structure on the surface of your planet will be reduced to ash. Our species will join the long list of civilizations that thought they could defy the Dominion and discovered that they were wrong. You have one rotation. Use it wisely. The response came from Secretary General Okonkwo. Her voice was steady, calm, and carried a weight that had nothing to do with volume. Fleet Commander Thyrax, we have heard your ultimatum. We have considered it carefully. And we want you to know that we understand exactly what you are threatening. We understand the power you command. We understand the history of the Draven Dominion. We understand that you have destroyed civilizations before. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something in her voice that transcended simple defiance. It was the voice of a species that had looked death in the face so many times that it had stopped being impressive. We understand all of this, and our answer is still no. It will always be no. You can burn our cities. You can scorch our fields. You can boil our oceans. But you will never, ever receive tribute from humanity. Not one grain of wheat, not one drop of water, not one child. If you want our world, you will have to kill every last one of us. And even then, we will find a way to make you regret it. Thyrax listened to the response and felt a flicker of something that might have been admiration in a different context. Then he dismissed it. He had heard brave speeches before. They always sounded hollow when the speaker was standing in the ruins of their civilization. Begin orbital bombardment sequence, he ordered. Target their largest population centers first. Standard cleansing pattern. The weapons officers across all 12 warships began their targeting procedures. Massive energy weapons swiveled toward the blue planet, charging with enough power to level mountains. The targeting computers locked onto cities: New York, London, Beijing, Mumbai, Tokyo, Moscow, Sao Paulo. Millions of lives in the crosshairs of 12 weapons arrays that had never missed a target. The first salvo was fired, 12 beams of concentrated destructive energy, each one capable of vaporizing a city in seconds, streaked across the void toward Earth. They never arrived. Approximately 40,000 kilometers above the planet's surface, the beams struck something invisible, a barrier, a shield of some kind that had not been there moments before. The beams scattered against it like water hitting stone, dissipating harmlessly into space. The shield rippled with a faint blue light where the beams had struck it, then settled back into invisibility. On the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, Thyrax stared at his displays with an expression that transitioned from confusion to disbelief to something very close to alarm in the space of 3 seconds. "What is that?" he demanded. His science officer, a thin draven named Kesix, who had spent her career studying planetary defenses, was already running analysis. Her fingers moved across her console with increasing speed, and the color drained from her face as the data came in. "Fleet Commander, the humans have deployed a planetary-scale energy barrier approximately 40,000 kilometers above their world's surface. It appears to be based on a modified application of fold space technology. The barrier is converting our weapon energy into harmless spatial distortions. It is absorbing everything we throw at it." "That is not possible," Thyrax said flatly. "They have had their fold space capability for less than 30 rotations. They cannot have developed a planetary shield in that time. It takes centuries to develop that kind of technology." "The data does not agree with that assessment, Fleet Commander. The shield is there. It is functional. And based on my analysis, it could absorb the combined firepower of our entire fleet for approximately 72 standard hours before showing any signs of degradation." Thyrax stood up from his chair. "Then we will bombard them for 72 hours. All ships, continuous fire. Full power." The compliance fleet opened up with everything it had. All 12 Ravager-class warships unleashed their full weapons arrays in a continuous barrage that would have cracked a moon in half. The space between the fleet and the planet became a solid wall of destructive energy, so bright that automatic filters had to engage to protect the eyes of everyone on the Draven bridges. For 6 hours the bombardment continued. The planetary shield held. It rippled and glowed and occasionally flashed with brilliant blue light where the energy was being absorbed. But it held. Sensors showed no degradation. No weakening, no sign that it was going to fail. And then, while the Draven fleet was focused entirely on breaking through the shield, something happened that Thyrax had not prepared for. The humans attacked. They came from behind the moon. 4 ships, angular and brutal and bristling with weapons, moving at a speed that should not have been possible for vessels that had been built in less than a month. They were smaller than the Ravager-class warships, barely a fifth of their size, but they moved with an agility and precision that the massive Draven vessels could not match. The lead ship, commanded by General Chen herself from a bridge that smelled of welding flux and fresh paint, fired the first shot. A directed energy beam, different from anything the Draven had encountered before, lanced across the void and struck the rearmost warship in the fleet squarely in its engine section. The Draven ship's shields flared and held, but the impact rocked the vessel and sent damage alerts cascading across its systems. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Chen ordered through gritted teeth. "Fire at will. Targeting priorities as briefed. Go for their engines first." The 4 human ships dove into the Draven fleet formation like wolves among cattle. They were faster, more maneuverable, and their pilots flew with a reckless aggression that no Draven tactical program had ever modeled. They wove between the massive warships, firing continuously, targeting engine sections, sensor arrays and weapons emplacements with a precision that spoke of intensive simulation training and an intuitive understanding of combat that went beyond mere tactics. The Draven ships returned fire, but their weapons were designed for planetary bombardment, not for engaging small, fast-moving targets at close range. Their targeting systems struggled to track the human ships, which changed direction and speed with an unpredictability that bordered on chaos. And then Park Min-jun's weapon activated. It was not a physical weapon. It was something far more dangerous. From a facility hidden deep beneath the mountains of South Korea, Minjun and his team launched a digital attack through the 2-nanosecond vulnerability they had identified in the Draven quantum encryption. The attack was carried on a precisely timed electromagnetic pulse that was bounced off a network of satellites the humans had quietly placed in orbit over the preceding weeks. The effect was devastating. Every Draven ship in the fleet simultaneously experienced cascading system failures as the attack wormed its way through their networks. Weapon systems glitched and rebooted. Navigation computers displayed conflicting data. Shield generators fluctuated wildly, creating gaps in their protection that lasted only fractions of a second. But fractions of a second were all the human ships needed. General Chen saw the shield fluctuations on her tactical display and did not hesitate. "All ships, concentrate fire on the flagship. Now!" The 4 human ships converged on the Dominion's RAF like arrows aimed at a heart. They fired simultaneously, their directed energy weapons hitting the flagship at 4 different points during a shield fluctuation that lasted exactly 1.3 seconds. The beams punched through the momentary gaps in the shield and struck the hull directly, tearing through the dark metal like claws through paper. The Dominion's RAF shuddered. Alarms screamed across every deck. Hull breaches on 3 levels. Engine power dropping. Weapon systems offline on the port side. Thyrax grabbed the armrest of his command chair and stared at the damage reports with an expression that his crew had never seen on his face before. "Fear. Fleet Commander," his tactical officer reported, voice shaking. "We have sustained critical damage. 2 other vessels report significant system failures from the electronic attack. Our shields are compromised. The human vessels are continuing their assault." Thyrax made a decision in that moment that he would never have believed himself capable of making. He ordered a retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal, not a strategic reposition. A retreat. Full fold space jump. All ships. Immediately. The compliance fleet activated their fold space drives. 11 of the 12 ships jumped successfully, vanishing from the Sol system in flashes of distorted light. The 12th, the rearmost vessel that had taken the first hit from General Chen's ship, could not activate its drive. Its engines were too badly damaged. It hung in space, disabled and alone, as the human ships circled it like predators around a wounded animal. "Do not destroy it," General Chen ordered. "Disable any remaining weapons and engines. We are taking that ship." The capture of the Draven warship took 47 minutes. Human boarding parties, wearing prototype combat suits that could withstand the vacuum of space, cut through the hull at 12 different points simultaneously, and poured into the vessel with the coordinated ferocity of soldiers who had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. The Draven crew, disoriented by the system failures and the damage to their ship, fought back with energy sidearms and their considerable physical strength. They were larger than humans, stronger, and their forearms gave them a significant advantage in close combat. It did not matter. The humans fought with a savagery and determination that the Draven had never encountered. They used the confined spaces of the ship's corridors to negate the Draven size advantage. They worked in teams of 4, covering each other with a seamless coordination that spoke of a species that had been fighting in close quarters for thousands of years. Room by room, corridor by corridor, deck by deck, they cleared the vessel. When it was over, the Draven crew was subdued and secured. Not a single human soldier had been killed, though many were injured. General Chen walked through the captured vessel and felt the weight of what they had accomplished settle onto her shoulders. Humanity had done the impossible. They had fought a fleet of the galaxy's dominant empire and had driven them away. They had captured an alien warship. They had defended their world. But she knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. The retreat of the compliance fleet sent shockwaves through the Draven Dominion that were felt across the galaxy. In the 6,000 years since the Dominion's founding, a compliance fleet had never retreated. Never. It was an event so unprecedented that many Draven officials initially refused to believe the reports. Fleet Commander Thyrax stood before the Supreme Arbiter in the Dominion's capital and delivered his report in a voice that was steady but hollow. He described the planetary shield. He described the human ships and their impossible agility. He described the electronic attack that had crippled his fleet's systems. He described the capture of the 12th vessel and its crew. And he told the Supreme Arbiter something that no fleet commander had ever told any arbiter in the history of the Dominion. "We cannot take that planet by force. Not with a fleet of 12. Not with a fleet of 100. By the time we assemble a larger force, they will have advanced further. Their rate of technological development is unlike anything we have ever recorded. In 30 rotations, they went from chemical propulsion to fold space drives. They went from projectile weapons to directed energy systems. They built a planetary shield that absorbed the full firepower of 12 Ravager-class warships. If we give them another 30 rotations, I do not want to imagine what they will build. The Supreme Arbiter, a massive Draven who had held his position for over 1,000 years, listened in silence. When Thyrax finished, the Arbiter spoke. Are you suggesting that we negotiate with them? I am suggesting that we have no choice. The silence that followed was the loudest silence in the history of the Draven Dominion. 3 months after the battle, a Draven diplomatic vessel entered the Sol system under a flag of truce. It carried a single passenger, an envoy authorized to speak on behalf of the Supreme Arbiter. The envoy's name was Yavara, and she was the Dominion's most experienced diplomat, a Draven who had negotiated treaties with species that had been spacefaring for millennia. She was escorted to Earth by 2 human warships, newer and more refined than the ones that had fought in the battle. The humans had not been idle in the 3 months since the battle. Their fleet had grown from 4 ships to 26. Their planetary shield had been upgraded and could now operate indefinitely. Their weapons technology had advanced so far beyond what it had been during the battle that the prototype weapons that had defeated the Compliance Fleet were already considered obsolete. Yavara landed at the UN complex in New York and was escorted to a conference room where Secretary General Okonkwo waited, flanked by General Chen, Dr. Whitfield, Park Min-joon, and representatives from every nation on Earth. Yavara looked at the humans gathered before her and felt something that no Draven diplomat had ever felt toward a species that had only been spacefaring for a few months. She felt respect. Secretary General Okonkwo, Yavara began, her voice measured and formal. I bring a message from the Supreme Arbiter of the Draven Dominion. The Dominion withdraws its demand for tribute from Earth and the Sol system. The Dominion recognizes humanity as a sovereign species with full rights under galactic law. The Dominion proposes a treaty of mutual non-aggression, and if humanity is willing, a partnership based on the exchange of knowledge and technology for mutual benefit. The room was quiet. Okonkwo studied the alien diplomat for a long moment before speaking. What changed? Yavara considered the question. You changed, she said simply. In 6,000 years, no species has ever done what you did, not because they lacked the desire, but because they lacked something that you have, something we do not fully understand. When we threatened you, you did not freeze. You did not fracture. You united. You adapted. You innovated. You turned 30 days of terror into 30 days of transformation. Your scientists did in weeks what other species take centuries to accomplish. Your soldiers fought with a courage that borders on insanity. And your people, your ordinary civilians who had every reason to surrender and save themselves, chose to stand instead. We have been the dominant power in this galaxy for 6,000 years because no species has ever been able to match our technology and our will simultaneously. You matched both. In a month, she paused and looked around the room. The Dominion does not fear many things, but we fear what you will become if we give you another year, or 10, or 100. The Supreme Arbiter has decided that it is better to have humanity as an ally than as an enemy, because the next time we fight, we will not win. And we know it. Okonkwo looked at General Chen, who gave a barely perceptible nod. She looked at Dr. Whitfield, who was already thinking about the scientific possibilities of a technology exchange. She looked at Park Min-joon, who was grinning like someone who had just been handed the keys to the largest computer network in the galaxy. She turned back to Yavara. We accept your proposal, but we have conditions. The tribute system ends. Not just for humanity. For every species in the Dominion, every species that is currently paying tribute will be offered the choice to continue or to stop. No more forced labor. No more population levies. No more taking resources by threat. If the Dominion wants to trade, it trades. As equals. Yavara blinked all 4 of her eyes. You are asking us to dismantle the entire foundation of our empire. Yes, Okonkwo said. We are. The Supreme Arbiter will never agree to this. Then, tell the Supreme Arbiter to come here and tell us that himself. We will be happy to explain our position. We have gotten quite good at explaining our position to the Draven. There was a long silence. Then Yavara did something that no Draven diplomat had ever done in the presence of a younger species. She laughed. It was a low, rumbling sound, and it carried genuine amusement. Secretary General, I am beginning to understand why you are so difficult to deal with. You do not simply refuse to kneel. You demand that everyone else stand up. That is exactly what we do, Okonkwo replied. It is what we have always done. The negotiations took 6 months. They were difficult, contentious, and at times came close to breaking down entirely. But in the end, the treaty was signed. The Draven Dominion did not collapse. It transformed. The tribute system was dismantled, replaced by a voluntary trade network that gave every species in the galaxy the right to participate as equals. Some species, those that had paid tribute for millennia and had never imagined any other way of life, struggled with the transition. But they had an example to follow. A small, stubborn species from a small blue planet that had shown the entire galaxy what was possible when you refused to accept that your place in the universe was on your knees. Commander Vorath, who had been the first Draven to see the humans, requested reassignment to the Sol system. He was granted the position of Draven Ambassador to Earth. It was an unusual choice, but the Supreme Arbiter approved it. Vorath had been right about the humans when everyone else had been wrong. That counted for something. On his first day as ambassador, Vorath stood on the observation deck of the Draven Embassy, which the humans had built in orbit above their planet as a gesture of goodwill, and looked down at the blue world spinning below him. He had been watching this planet for months now. First from his scout ship with fear and confusion, and now from this embassy with something closer to wonder. A human aide approached him, a young woman named Corporal Torres, assigned as his liaison. She was small by Draven standards, barely reaching Vorath's chest, with dark hair and eyes that were sharp and curious. Ambassador, you have been standing here for 2 hours. Is everything all right? Vorath considered the question. Corporal Torres, may I ask you something? Of course. When the demand was issued, when my ship appeared in your sky and told your species to surrender, were you afraid? Torres thought about it for a moment. Yes, she said honestly. Everyone was afraid. But you did not surrender. No, why not? Your technology was primitive. Our fleet could have destroyed you. Logic dictated surrender. Torres looked up at the tall alien ambassador and smiled. It was a small smile, but it contained something that Vorath had come to recognize over the past months as distinctly, uniquely human. Because fear is not a reason to stop fighting, Ambassador. It is just a feeling. And feelings pass. What does not pass, what never passes for us, is the knowledge that some things are worth more than survival. Freedom is worth more than survival. Dignity is worth more than survival. The right to look up at the stars and know that you earned your place among them, that is worth more than survival. She paused. Besides, we are humans. We have been surviving things we should not have survived since the day we first stood upright on the plains of Africa. It is sort of our thing. Vorath looked at her for a long moment and then turned back to the viewport. Below, the blue planet turned slowly in the light of its star, and on its surface, 7 billion humans went about their lives, building, creating, arguing, laughing, fighting, loving, being stubbornly, impossibly, magnificently alive. Corporal Torres, Vorath said quietly. I have lived for over 200 years. I have visited hundreds of worlds and met hundreds of species, and I want you to know something. What is that, Ambassador? Your species is the most terrifying thing I have ever encountered, and I mean that as the highest compliment I am capable of giving. Torres laughed. It was a bright, warm sound that echoed across the observation deck. Thank you, Ambassador. We get that a lot. Below them, Earth kept turning. And across the galaxy, 900 species were learning a lesson that the humans had known since the very first cave dweller had looked at the darkness outside the firelight and decided to walk into it anyway. The universe does not give you your place. You take it. You earn it. You fight for it. And once you have it, you hold it with everything you have, and you never, ever let go. That was the human way. And now, it was becoming the galactic way. Not because humanity had conquered anyone, not because they had built the biggest fleet or the most powerful weapons, though they had done those things too, but because they had shown every species in the galaxy something that 6,000 years of Draven rule had tried to extinguish. That you do not have to kneel. That you were never meant to kneel. That the only tribute worth paying is the tribute you pay to yourself, to your own courage, your own will, your own refusal to be anything less than what you were born to be. That Draven had come to Earth expecting to collect tribute from another conquered species. Instead, they had received something far more valuable and far more dangerous than any mineral or resource or labor force. They had received an answer, and that answer had changed everything.